to Death Country. I'm KT McFarland. Now, are you ready for this? ISIS forces are fighting the Kurds in a city on the Turkish border. So to make some sense of this, joining us now is a panel. We've got retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton and retired Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff from the Marine Corps. So let me start with you ladies first. Jessie, who's fighting whom and who should be fighting?
Well, you know, right now there's a lot of finger pointing, obviously, because the U.S. would like to have Turkey get more engaged and be more involved with trying to relieve the ISIS pressure that's going on along their own border. But meanwhile, Turkey is saying, no, we're not going to do anything because you haven't removed President Assad. So there's a lot of pushing and pulling on both sides right now. And the Obama administration wants to see Turkey take a more aggressive action against these extremists who essentially have created this huge, enormous international debacle now that's going on.
Okay, Colonel Leighton, Cedric, you're an Air Force officer, retired Air Force officer. You know the value of bombing. At what point does somebody have to get involved on the ground?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, KT, but usually what you're trying to do is you're trying to win a war. And if you're trying to win a war, you put boots on the ground very, very quickly. Only rarely do bombing campaigns work by themselves. One possible thing that you could point to in history would be what happened with Bosnia and the Dayton Peace Accords. We were able to do that without putting U.S. boots on the ground in the former Yugoslavia. But other than that recent example, there's really no good example that says you can do bombing alone and achieve a permanent solution to what you're trying to get to.
All right, well, Cedric, let me follow up with you then. Whose boots are going to go on the ground?
Well, right now, there's, of course, a vehement protestation coming from the area behind me here, as well as, from the White House, which basically says there will be no U.S. boots on the ground. I think from the very beginning, actually, I thought that this was a very unrealistic assumption on the part of the administration, because you really need to keep, first of all options open. But secondly, you need to make sure that you have the types of boots on the ground that can work well with air power. And in this particular case, if there are going to be no U.S. boots on the ground, I would say that Turkish boots are most likely, followed by potentially Jordanian troops, and obviously we already have Iraqi and Kurdish boots that are there on the ground and are doing fighting, but the effectiveness of that fighting is questionable in the case of the Iraqis. In the case of the Kurds, they clearly have some great capabilities, great spirit, but there is a lack of weapons, there's a lack of supplies, and that's a huge, huge problem because they don't really coordinate their efforts that well with air power, at least haven't to this point.
Jessie, let me turn to you. The President Erdogan of Turkey has said that Turkish cooperation sort of hinges on our creating a no-fly zone over Syria. Why does he want that, and what are the implications?
Well, first of all, the administration is very, very reluctant to start implementing this. There's multiple reasons. One, we're going to end up looking at a long-term, like we had in Iraq in 1991, all the way to 2003. We had the no-fly zone that protected the Kurds in northern Iraq. So essentially, General Dempsey has stated that this will cost about $1 billion a month to maintain and manage. It will take hundreds of planes and to ensure this. But second of all, we haven't got a declaration of war. In order for us to suppress the Syrian army, which is very capable in their air force, we would end up having to declare war. And right now, Congress is already having a hard time with Obama's movement on the 2001 Bush administration that we could do what we're doing now to stop al-Qaeda. Remember, it had to have an imminent threat, which was the Khorasan group. So all these other issues aren't relative to the imminent threat upon the United States. So in order for us to do the no-fly zone, we are actually going to have to go either work with Assad or work against Assad. And neither of these are going to be in our best interest, because Assad is known to have probably committed genocide against 200,000 Syrians, and we have humanitarian concerns with him, so we can't work with him. And then if we work against him, it's going to require an act of war. So essentially, we're in a rock and a hard place.
You're welcome to the Middle East, right? Let me ask you both very quickly. Do you think the administration policy changes, Cedric, after the November elections? And I'll ask the same question of you, Jessie.
I think it might, KT, because the elections, of course, once they're done, that'll give them an opportunity to do what they want to or need to do without fear of political consequences. And since we're entering the last 2 years of the president's term, it will be a very easy thing from a policy perspective to go in and say, okay, the elections are done now, let's go and do what we really need to do. And of course, it also depends on exactly who wins in the midterms. If the Republicans take control of the Senate, I suspect we'll see a bit of a more hawkish response than we would if the Democrats win.
Okay, Jessie, you've been involved in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Do you think things change after the election, and if so, how?
Well, first of all, I think this president is going to be reluctant to do anything at all. He's been dragging this whole step of the way. I mean, this whole debacle has been created by a lack of our foreign policy to ensure that we kept peace within the region. We have basically been pouring gasoline on this since we pulled out of Iraq. So with that said, the election, if we do get a Republican Senate, this is going to be making it very difficult for the president to continue with movement without their authority. They're going to force him to get authority. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of difficulty for him to get funding for any of his projects that he wants. So if it should not go, if the Senate does not go to the Republicans and it is a Democrat-ruled Senate, it's probably going to be business as usual. And we're going to be seeing this terrorist activity for the next 30 years, like Leon Panetta has said. We're going to be fighting them for the next 30 years.
We're not going to be fighting them because I'll be playing golf in Florida 30 years from now. But thank you both very much.
I'll be with you.
Thank you both very much for joining us, Colonel Cedric Leighton and Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff. And that's it for DEFCON 3.